Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the East Riding of Yorkshire series. Together with the unparished city of Hull, it forms the county of the same name. There's 172 parishes here. Which one are we in today? Welcome back to the East Riding of Yorkshire, everybody. It's a lovely fine September morning here, which means this place should look nice. Now, at the end of the last episode, you'll notice that it said there were 4 parishes remaining. In actual fact, there's only 3, because this one kind of confused me a few years ago. I'll explain more as we walk around the parish of Wawne. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Wawne, Quaking Bog. In the East Riding this week, we're covering the first of the 2 parishes that remain between Beverley and Hull. This one borders the latter city and has several connections to part of it. Its name is Wawne, a peculiar title which derives from the Old English word wagen, which means shaking. It's commonly accepted that this is a reference to shaking ground or a quaking bog. Translated into modern English, we'd know such a feature as a quagmire. Wawne used to be a cul-de-sac with only one road in and out of it. However, developments over recent centuries have changed its topography somewhat. It's still a small village with a modest central historic core, although lots of modern housing has been added in recent times off its main street. These houses would act as homes for the workers at Hull Prison. Further housing has also been added to the west since then, and that means that Wawne has a pretty sizable population these days. Its westernmost point is the end of Ferry Lane, where until the 1940s a boat transported people across the River Hull to Thearne. The parish also includes a tiny hamlet called Meaux, whose main historical feature is the site of Meaux Abbey in the fields to the west of the road to Routh. We'll talk about that here too. There's quite a bit in this little place. Let's get cracking and see what's what. We start on Meaux Road, the main street leading north from Wawne towards the A1035 at Routh. This used to be the only road in and out of Wawne. The village at that time was effectively a massive cul-de-sac. Things have changed since those times though, and now you can get to Hull by passing straight through the village. Off Meaux Road is Fairholme Lane, mostly residential in much the same way as the street it springs from. However, up here there are a couple of small businesses. One of them is Panel Processing Limited, a family-run company who make wooden cabinets, primarily speaking. In the other unit next door is MH Specialist Joinery. Between them, these two provide a small amount of local employment, but Wawne is mainly a commuter village. Before we leave Fairholme Lane, here's what I'm calling the Lasses Tree, related to the Wawne in Bloom organisation who managed the flower beds until recently. Back to Meaux Road we have a farm, but that's about it for this street. Let's head onto Main Street now. Even though Wawne may not be a total cul-de-sac like it used to be, this is still a dead end because the River Hull provides a rather big, watery obstacle. This central street is the oldest part of the village, and that's pretty obvious. Wawne was an agricultural settlement, and that part of its history hasn't been totally forgotten. In various locations around the place there are some old ploughs interspersed with the flower beds and common spaces. The houses to the north here are built on the site of the former Wawne Hall. It was demolished in order to provide housing for workers and guards at Hull Prison. It was lived in by the Ash Wyndham family, hence the name of the modern street, Wyndham Crescent. They also had a hand in the next landmark too. That would be the village hall. A small brick building once stood here. It was provided by the Wyndhams as a reading room in 1900 and was used as such until 1926. In the 1980s the current village hall came along, but the former reading room next door was still used for church meetings. Out the front in the car park we have a parish notice board. Let's get Wawne marked off, everyone. We're down to, well, 3, or is it 2? Keep watching, we'll find out later. Also close to the village hall is a bus stop. Wawne is served by the number 10 to Hull, and this village is its terminus. So yes, indeed, there is a bus service here in Wawne these days. There used to be 2 other forms of transport associated with this part of the East Riding as well. The Hull and Hornsea Railway, which we've covered loads of times before in previous episodes, used to run through the southern portion of this parish as well. And there was also a way to get across the River Hull too. There was a ferry, but that's now long gone. Because Wawne is a dead end, there's warning signs here informing you of turning buses. They don't have a great deal of space to do so down here. We're now in the vicinity of the local shop, the Wawne Family Shopper. After this shop, the road forks into 2 pieces. To the right is Ferry Road, at the end of which there was once a ferry that ran to Thearne on the other side of the River Hull. Its history goes back to at least the 12th century, and it remained in existence until 1946. Greens Lane also terminates at the River Hull as well, but at certain times of day, this particular street gets busy. And this is why. This is Wawne Primary School. Education in the village can be traced back to 1743, when there was a school supported by the parents of around 30 pupils. Its master was also the parish clerk. This early school may have been held in the church. A dedicated school building was finally provided in 1828 by Joseph Smith Wyndham. The current school dates from 1909 and could originally accommodate 90 children. In the 1960s, a large extension was added to accommodate 150 further pupils. Well, I've just been spotted by someone who recognised me. Passed me a copy of this. This is the Wawne Gazette, which tells you all the happenings going on in the parish of Wawne. The guy, I think he said he was on the parish council. And I'm going to have a flick through this later and have a little read and see if it gives me any information, actually, about the place that I'm currently in. Now, we've come to the very end of the road, as we know, because the dead ends, Ferry Road and Greens Lane, you can't go any further because of the River Hull. So now to get back to where we came from, what we have to do is make a little loop around this housing estate. And this is pretty much all residential, so there's not really many landmarks up here. But it will bring us out at the church, which is our next sort of major thing to talk about. So without further ado, we'll carry on walking. I might have a read of this while I'm going. Wawne's church is dedicated to St Peter. Wawne has always had a strong connection to Sutton-on-Hull, the former village which is now part of a northern Hull suburb. In the early 12th century, their villagers had to come to St Peter's to attend Mass and all feast days, as it was considered senior to the tiny chapel once in Sutton. Baptisms, marriages and burials could only be carried out here until Sutton's church, dedicated to St James, was consecrated in 1349. Outside St Peter's we have a war memorial. This commemorates the 3 sons of Wawne who lost their lives in the 2 world wars. We've returned to the junction at the centre of the village where there's a white phone box. Well, we are, after all, close to Hull. Heading this way, there are some more modern properties, but it's all a little more sparse. Now in the easternmost reaches of the village, we're heading towards the Waggoners, a pub which looks a little forlorn these days. This was opened in the 1970s. For a time it became a Chinese restaurant, which was noted for its bright orange roof. This meant it was easily identifiable from the air, and Wawne stood out to passing aircraft landing at Humberside Airport. Over the road we have Paradise Produce Farm Shop. They sell rare breed pork from a herd of Oxford Sandy and black pigs. These beautiful traditional pigs live in paddocks in the summer and straw yards in the winter. And with no way through the farm, the only option is to turn around here to get back to the start. This was the view at this point, and it's rather nice, right? One thing I'm going to miss when the East Riding is eventually finished are the wooden signs. There's one right on the main junction here. To the north it points us towards Beverley, and to the south towards Hull and its northern suburbs. Now, as well as pointing you in the direction of Beverley and Hull, and of Wawne indeed, this sign also points you towards Meaux, which is a tiny hamlet also within Wawne's parish boundaries. There isn't really much there. The road just basically goes up through Meaux into Ralph. Which of course we saw a long time ago. However, in a field just off the road, there's the remains of Meaux Abbey. You can't get to them because it's private land. However, the internet exists for something like this, doesn't it? Let's talk a bit about that before we head to the finish of this episode. Meaux is a tiny hamlet which has almost nothing of note, well, to the untrained eye at least. Meaux was once a very important settlement, and the evidence for that can be found in the fields off the road to Ralph. Meaux Abbey, which was archaically referred to as Melser, was Cistercian. It was founded in 1151 by William le Gros, the first Earl of Albemarle, Earl of York, and the fourth Lord of Holdernesse. A chronicle of its history was written by Thomas Burton, one of its former abbots. The abbey owned the land of Wyke, which was purchased by King Edward I in 1293 to establish the town of Kingston upon Hull. The abbey was dissolved in 1539 by King Henry VIII. It was demolished and the stones were used to build Hull's town defences. Virtually nothing remains of the abbey today except for some earthworks on private land. The site, though, is a scheduled ancient monument. Meaux was formerly a township in the parish of Wawne and became a civil parish in its own right in 1935 before being abolished and merged with Wawne. It should be noted that the name Mews, or Mewis, is related to Meaux. It's a fairly common family name in the northeast of England, believed to be used by the descendants of those who came to Yorkshire as soldiers commanded by Gamel. Okay, so I've driven down to the end of Ferry Road, as far as the road will allow you to go, because you can't go much further. There is the River Hull, and that is where the ferry would have taken people across from the eastern side of the Hull to the other side, the western bank. Now, before we finish, I'm going to drive along Ferry Road and back into the village, because there's a few more things I want to catch with the car just before we leave this one behind. But before we do that, you'll remember at the very beginning of this episode I said that this is effectively two parishes in one, and this is all down to a mistake I made nearly 4 years ago. Let's explain. Now, when I began the East Riding series almost 4 years ago, I was still using a very old and very error-prone method of counting how many parishes a district has. Luckily for me, I've never miscounted anything except the East Riding of Yorkshire. Here's Wawne's parish boundaries on Google Maps, and as you can see, it looks like it's split into two pieces. The main one on the left with the village and the hamlet of Meaux within it, and a smaller section to the southeast. I mistook that smaller section for a separate parish when I drew the original East Riding map, which I've used since the start. It was only when I got to Swine and learned about Bransholme Castle, the site of which is within that segment, that I realised my error. We spoke at length about Bransholme Castle in that Swine episode, and that'll be linked in the end screen of this video. So the East Riding only has 171, not 172. So, in effect, coming to Wawne has finally eradicated the issue. There are 2 left now, not 3. Driving away from the River Hull, here's a bit more about the ferry and some of the other history in this part of Wawne. The opening of Sutton Road Bridge in 1937 had a serious effect on the Wawne ferry, as drivers could use it for free, but still had to pay for the ferry. It wasn't the main reason for its demise though. It was eventually considered unsafe to use in 1946. Both Wawne and Meaux once had licensed alehouses in the later 18th century. In Wawne, one of these was called the Anchor, or alternatively the Wyndham Arms. It was located at the river crossing. The Wyndham Arms remained open until 1967, despite the ferry disappearing 2 decades beforehand. It was later used as a farmhouse. Before its 20th century growth, the village had a cricket field off Main Street. It was replaced in 1963 by another pitch, occupying 1.5 acres of land off Ferry Road. That still exists today as the playing field, which was enlarged in 1971 with tennis courts and a children's play area. And that will do us for Wawne, and with it we've now almost covered everything that borders the city of Hull, but there is one left. Join me next week as we tackle the East Riding's penultimate parish. It's one with at least 3 villages within it, and it's spread out over a massive area between Hull and Beverley. See you soon. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.